habitat that is okay. So these deep sea hydrothermal vents, most of them are located at the mid-ocean ridges. So if you remember, when we were talking about how the Earth was formed, we 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 mentioned of the active plates where you have subduction on one part and you have uh, the mid-ocean ridges where new Earth is being formed. Okay, so these are all areas of a lot of Earth movements, uh, volcanic activity. So very active uh, Earth movements. Okay, so at the mid-ocean ridges, we have this new Earth being formed. So you have a lot of magma, the molten Earth, which is being formed at the mid-oceanic ridge. So when you reach the end of the plate, there are subduction zones here. So there are several theory or hypotheses about how the center of the Earth is so hot, you know, that all the that is molten. Okay, some says it's because of the decay of naturally radioactive elements. Some say during the original formation it was because of the impact from falling meteorites. So these are all just hypotheses. So what are the characteristics of a deep sea hydrothermal vent? So of course, if it's deep sea, then it has to be uh, uh, at least 1,800 meters or more. Although some nowadays they've reported shallower hydrothermal vents. Okay, so when it's deep sea, for us, deep sea hydrothermal vents are more interesting because it's aphotic, which means there's no sunlight. So if there's no sunlight, that means there's no photosynthesis. So no photosynthesis. If there is any thriving ecosystem without sunlight, that means it is one of the ecosystem that do not depend on photosynthetic primary production. Okay? So that's why it's important. It's one of the ecosystems can uh, that can survive without sunlight. So when there are no primary producers producing capturing the energy and producing carbon biomass for the other trophic levels, so you have to have some other organisms to take over the role of primary production, and this role is in the deep hydrothermal vents. The role is taken over by the chemotrophic bacteria. Okay, chemotrophic bacteria. So some of the interesting geological features. Later on, we'll see how the bacteria functions in this deep sea hydrothermal vent. Okay, so interesting geological features. You'll have a black smoker. You also have white smoker. Okay, so these are just chimneys where you can see black smoke and white smoke. So the chimneys are actually because of the precipitation of the minerals, okay, and can grow up to 60 meters before collapsing. Okay, then because there's very high pressure at the deep sea levels, so the water does not boil at this high pressure. You can have temperatures up to 400 degrees Celsius, and the water is still not boiling. Okay, so these are characteristics of the deep sea hydrothermal vent. How is it formed? So at the mid-ocean ridges, you have spreading centers. Okay, so as it uh, as it spreads, as material rises to fill in the space between the plates at the mid-ocean ridges, some of the ocean water infiltrate the ocean floor. These are called these areas are called the coal seeps. Okay, so it mixes with the molten crust. It gets boiled. It gets enriched with the metals, elements, iron, copper, zinc, sulfate, and other elements, and then it rises back up through any cracks that it can find. Okay, so as it rises up, the metals in the chemicals inside the plume, they call this the plume, quickly precipitates and build the chimney as it grows up higher and higher. Okay, so so as you have the mid-ocean ridge earth forming, you have coal seeps where the water comes in. It will mix with it will be heated by the magma lava area, and this interaction between cold and warm will crack the rocks, will also solubilize a lot of elements. Okay, so these elements, these chemicals will enter the water, and this water becomes superheated and will go up the chimneys. Okay, so this is also a hypothesis. Okay, not really proven yet. So this is a picture of the black smoker. Okay, so the chimney is here, you can see, and the smoke coming out is black in color. So it's black because of the dissolved minerals, specific types of dissolved minerals, iron, copper, zinc, and mostly sulfide. So it's about 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. We also have white smokers, and this is because of the chemicals such as barium, calcium, and silica. Okay, so this forms the white smoker. You also notice that the temperatures are lower than the black smoker. So these are the geological structures that you will find at a deep sea hydrothermal vent. So as a habitat, it is you have different a wide range of temperature. Okay, it can be 40 degrees Celsius all the way up to 150 degrees Celsius. Okay, so of course, if it's exactly where the plume is coming out, it will be about 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. But most of these animals, most of these microorganisms and organisms, they will find suitable temperature niches for them to establish themselves. So bacteria is the main organism here, the main component in the food web. Okay, it functions as the primary producer because it is able to produce energy and biomass through chemosynthesis. Okay, the chemoautotrophic bacteria is able to carry out chemosynthesis. So not photosynthesis, but chemosynthesis. So initially, the bacteria forms the microbial mats on the seafloor. Then once it has formed, uh, once the bacteria has established itself, the abundance of this biomass will attract other or higher organisms such as copypods, crabs, and amphipods. So this will eat up the graze upon the bacteria. So later on, once it takes about 3 years for the chimney to mature. So you can see the microbial mat, and you can see the starfish grazing on it also. Okay, so the microbial biomats can be quite thick, up to more than 1 cm thick. So more than 1 cm thick of bacteria, that is a substantial amount of biomass. Okay, so these are mainly filamentous colorless sulfur bacteria, because if you remember, sulfite, sulfur, sulfites, these are the chemicals in the plume itself. Okay, so the mats are characterized by a high rate of CO2 assimilation. CO2 assimilation is like CO2 fixation, so changing the CO2 into carbohydrate form, and methane oxidation. So once you've passed through once the habitat has matured beyond the amphipods, copepods, then you have larger organisms like the giant tube worm. Okay, so the giant tube worm is also known as Riftia pachyptila. Okay, so all these larger organisms, actually they can only survive because of uh, symbiosis. Okay, so for the giant tube worm, it depends on the bacteria to produce food for it. So the bacteria lives inside the giant tube worm and then carries out chemosynthesis to produce food for the worm. Okay. So the plume provides the nutrients to the bacteria that lives inside the worm. So the worm has a reddish tinge here because of the hemoglobin that captures the oxygen. So the worm actually provides a suitable habitat for the bacteria, okay, and also exchange certain compounds with the seawater. So other than the giant tube worms, you have a well-established deep sea hydrothermal vents will also have shrimps, pale, you'll have crabs, and you'll have mussels. It's actually quite a thriving habitat. However, these hydrothermal vents are very unstable. Okay, although even though it takes 3 years to reach maturity, uh, it it is very vulnerable to earth movements. So the extremes of hydrothermal vents can include temperatures less than 2 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius to even 150 degrees Celsius. It depends on how near you are to the source of the heat. Okay, so you know that at 2 degrees Celsius, most of the organisms do not survive, or they are very uh, like suspended animation, like they don't really thrive in this kind of conditions. So the range here is very extreme. So organisms have to be able to adapt. Okay, even the pH can be from acidic values as low as 4 when it's very near the plume to the alkaline seawater when you fly away from the plume. Oxygen concentration from anoxic when you're very near the plume to ambient levels. Ambient means the normal levels. You also have high concentrations of sulfite. Your sulfite can be toxic. Okay? So if it's too high concentration, it can be called toxic. So you can have high concentrations to undetectable concentrations. So the fauna The organisms that survive at the deep sea hydrothermal vents have to have high adaptability to the extremes of the hydrothermal vent. Okay, so it doesn't last long because volcanic eruptions, earth movement can easily destroy the chimney. Once the chimney breaks, the plume, the vent fluids might cease to flow or use another pathway to flow. So once the plume goes elsewhere, the source of warmth, the source of heat, the source of food, the source of chemicals, nutrients for the bacteria is no longer present, then the whole habitat collapse. Okay, so it is very dynamic. Dynamic means uh, moving very fast, changing fast, dynamic environment. Okay, so once the fluid ceases to flow, the sessile organisms will die. Sessile organisms are organisms that are stuck, stuck at the uh, chimney. So these are not, they don't move, okay, as opposed to the mobile inhabitants. So the ones that can move, the nectons, uh, the, they can escape and find new vent sites, okay, but the sessile organisms will die, okay. So it lasts only years to decades, okay. So it's a very uh, dynamic and fragile ecosystem, okay. So most of the vent organisms have symbiotic associations with bacteria. Okay, even the mollusks have sulfur oxidizing bacteria as their symbionts in the gills. So this is deep sea hydrothermal vents is part of what uh, a microbiology field. They call it the deep sea microbiology. So for this to occur, you need to have submersibles. You need to have vessels that are able to go down at least 2,000 meters and more. So you have deep sea submersibles from Japan, the Shinkai. You have from China. You have from Woods Hole, America. So these are able. The one from America is called Elvin. So these are able to go to the deep sea waters to study them. So why do they want to study these organisms? Because the bacteria have biotechnological potential. Okay? The enzymes, the genes from this bacteria can be cloned and used for biotechnology, used in the field of biotechnology. Okay, so that's why there is money for this kind of research, but not every country has the financial ability to carry out this research. So you see a black smoker with a chimney here, then you have your uh, cube worms. Okay, so the deep sea hydrothermal food web, you see the primary producers here based on the chemoautotrophic bacteria, the symbionts, but the symbionts are also dependent upon the bacteria that provides the food within these symbionts. So these primary producers support the second trophic levels, okay, and then so on and so forth. But you see here you have photosynthetically derived organic material. So these are actually sinking detritus from the surface. So photosynthesis is actively carried out in the surface waters. And then these phytoplankton, copepods, and other organisms all will die and sink. Okay, so sometimes it will support uh, other organisms when they sink to the bottom of the sea. So for microorganisms, most of the time, by the time they sink to the bottom of the sea, their nutrition level is already very low, because sink to the bottom, if it takes about 1,000, if it's about 1,800 meter deep, by the time it sinks, most of the bacteria midway will have degraded the organic materials. What we can see is sometimes you have whales, large animals, whales, sharks that die and sink to the bottom. So this will have the potential to support uh, a lot of these uh, organisms at the bottom of the floor. Okay, bottom of the sea floor. Okay, so the chemosynthetic food web, chemosynthesis, for example, the oxidation of hydrogen sulfide to produce carbohydrate. Okay. So this chemosynthesis, you do not need light. You use other uh, reducing other elements to oxidize the hydrogen sulfide.